Thank you very much. We just have three small and brief questions for brilliant minds. One is, which idea are you really concerned about that it's doing the round around us, and that could be very, very dangerous if it actually happens? On the other hand, and you have 2 minutes, each of you, 3 minutes at most, then the opposite. Which idea do you strongly believe that it should happen, and like that we would have a better world? And at the end, well, you have a few minutes to talk about how to actually make those things happen or not happen. Thank you very, very much for being with us. Would you like to start, Trey?
I'm pleased to start. In fact, hearing your questions over lunch, I wrote down some ideas to try to be different than what you were expecting. So on worst ideas, I have anti-intellectualism, fear of science, religious fundamentalism, climate change denialism, fear of GMOs, and the worst, at least in American politics, is fungible facts. So I think one of the headlines after the wonderful re-election of President Obama, yes, was that truth actually matters. And it's been a dangerous trend in the US where politicians make up their own facts, whether it's about science, about the economy, and without a source to get to what the real truth is, it's very difficult for people to know what to do. Now, science fundamentally in fact, perhaps, is the only discipline that is just truth-based and fact-based. No politics is supposed to enter into it, no religious views. You get the facts, and that's what science is, to uncover the facts about life. And that's what we're working to discover. So if you deny those in education, if you want to teach that Darwin was wrong, if you want to force religious teaching in place of science, the world is going to have a very, very difficult future.
Bravo. Thank you. Don Ricardo, you're an expert in financial markets, in education. You have a lot of interest, a Renaissance man.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to take another take. Obviously, humanity has made so many mistakes, and we continually have so many bad ideas. You pretty much touched all of those on your list. But I want to signal out one thing which I call forced collectivism. We saw the disastrous effects of this philosophy of collectivism being imposed on people, for example, in the Stalin pogroms, where millions and millions of people lost their lives. We saw this idea imposed on the Chinese people during the Cultural Revolution, when the idea was the people are wise and we should do well if we send all the intellectuals to the fields. And we saw this happen also in my country with the ejido, which is a forced collectivism on peasants, which resulted in tremendous impoverishment and the lack of productivity of our whole agro sector. So I think that idea is particularly dangerous and counterproductive. And at the same time, I'm going ahead here, but if we think about one of the better ideas is when you have a collective action on a voluntary basis, which is completely different. Yeah? Completely different. We just came from a restaurant where it happens to be that the manager has organized all his waiters and cooks and staff, and they work like a collective. And they're doing really well. It's a really good restaurant, by the way. But again, this is a voluntary thing. It's quite different situation from the forced collectivism.
In fact, President Obama got elected again exactly for this voluntary action. People went out in the community and made it happen.
So I agree with my colleagues on all those counts. It's hard for us to disagree. I think we have a common philosophy. I'll add a couple of things. I think that one bad idea is the notion that people should not take risk. In fact, I am on the stage talking to entrepreneurs and young people all the time about how important it is to take risks, because the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea. And so where in our society do we allow, in fact, encourage entrepreneurs to try risky ideas, to try for those breakthroughs? Clearly, both of you have not achieved what you've done in life by doing always the safe thing to do. So that's one idea that I'm out, that I think the notion of taking risks and trying to do big things in the world is a bad idea. I think it's a great idea. I think that's what's driving society forward, those people willing to take risks. And if you fail, that's okay. You get up, you learn, and you try again. So societies which stigmatize failure and say, oh, that person failed, forget it, that is a society that is killing itself. The second thing I would talk about is the notion that business is evil. I think that's a very bad thing to think about. That business doesn't belong in biological sciences of creating life forms, or business does not belong in going out to the stars to mine the asteroids. The fact of the matter is those businesses are what drive the economics, would provide the capital, would provide the incentives so that every single person benefits. The fact that the wealthiest on earth had the first cell phones was a wonderful thing, because now 2, 3, 4, eventually 7 billion people will have cell phones because those early people invested the capital.
Great. Un aplauso, por favor,
Very
para
nice
los
point.
tres. So there is the word freedom, freedom in all the aspects, in terms of ideas, against religion, freedom against not defining correctly property rights, and freedom to take risk, and freedom against fear. But there are also good ideas that some people believe that they are good but not so good, and we have to do something to actually achieve them. So it's time to talk about dangerous, good ideas that we have to take risk, bet on them, and make them happen. Would you like to start?
Sure. One of the ideas and companies I started, and we started about 4 years ago, announced it this year, is a company called Planetary Resources. It's backed by a group of billionaires in the United States that's going out to actually mine the asteroids, to go out to the thousands and thousands of rocks out there that are flying through space, many of them coming close to the Earth. Sometimes they come too close and they hit the Earth, and that's a very bad thing. But those asteroids, a sub-percentage of them are very rich in platinum group metals, rubidium, palladium, osmium, the things which are important for our energy society, our electronic society. And the technology now exists to begin thinking about really the solar system as our economic sphere of influence, not just Earth. In fact, many of the platinum mines on Earth are previous asteroid impact sites. So we are looking at, we're developing the technologies to go out there and capture these, really to make these rare earth strategic metals available to everybody, to really, like I spoke about aluminum being a very precious metal that technology made abundant, the same idea that we're going to take those rare metals, platinum, palladium, osmium, that has tremendous prices, and make them abundant, and the benefits we get societally is huge. So being able to see the asteroids before they hit the Earth, and being able to bring the resources of space into the economic influence of humanity is an idea.
Yes. Well, as I mentioned, the collective efforts on a voluntary basis, I think, make a big difference in society. And one of the ways that this collective effort is being empowered these days is by this connected society, especially through mobile devices. I think that is a really good idea whose time has come. And the fact that we all have those computers in our hands that can give us access to any and all information, and that enable us to work together and to communicate together and to form groups of like-minded individuals, I think it's a really transformative factor in society, just like the sequencing of the DNA and so forth. The impact of having billions of people connected through mobile computers, I think will change the world for the better very soon. We saw in one of the presentations those graphs, you know, that today the internet penetration was like 20%, and that is going to go up to 60%. Well, that's going to happen precisely because of mobile devices. It's not going to be the connectivity at home, and it's not going to be the fixed computers, nor the laptops. They're going to be iPads and iPods and iPhones and similar kind of devices, Android phones, that will allow us to talk to our like-minded group of people, to work together, to harness this collective intelligence that is really far superior to any individual one, and we will be able to achieve great things. So I think that's one of my points.
Bravo.
Yeah. In fact, I completely agree with that, and we'll expand upon it. So here's my luncheon list for best ideas. So distributed manufacturing, and I talked about a little bit with 3D printers and then ultimately with biological printers, is an extension of the mobile devices. And Peter was talking about space, but most people don't realize something as simple as the iPhone has, what, 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more computing power than everything associated with getting us to the moon and back. I mean, it's really stunning. And we take it for granted because we start to use them every day. So these will build on things. In fact, so the other things on the list are changing food production that I mentioned, renewable energy, synthetic life obviously is extremely important, and population control, because population control is shown to happen naturally as a matter of distributed wealth. So as wealth builds in countries, the birth rate goes way down and gets under control. We're going to add 1 billion people to this planet in the next 10 years. And at the rate we're going 11 years after that, we're going to add another 1 billion. So that's the equivalent of adding China to the world population every decade or so. Something has to change. And it's not, we can't do it all just by limiting population growth. We have to find new sources of food, fuel, energy, and it's all going to happen when we go to this distributed world.
Peter, do you really agree with that last comment? Should we be concerned about that?
Well, I agree with what Craig said, which is that the healthier and wealthier and better educated you make a populace, the lower its birth rate is. And so we are going to, hopefully, we're on a trend, you know, as entrepreneurs are creating new devices to educate and create these new technologies. And I do know that a lot of the smartest people I know are beginning to bet on synthetic biology as one of the most powerful tools on the planet, right? Every decade has its technology that is new. You know, telecom industry, the internet, social media. Really, this next decade, really, Craig, is yours, with synthetic biology becoming one of the most powerful tools. You know, and as the stagecoach was replaced by the train, was replaced by the airplane, so too, what you're building is going to allow people to have a lot better sources of energy and food and raise the quality of life. And for me, that's exciting. I'll add one last thing, which is what gets me most excited, and it's what we teach at Singularity University, is that a small group of educated, passionate graduate students, like we have here, and thanks to your generosity, sir, we have a couple of dozen of SU graduate students here, are able to build a company, a product, or a service that can impact the lives of tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and ultimately 1 billion people. And that gets me excited about our ability to change the world.
And if I might add also, the fact that we have this internet-connected mobile web empowers individuals and young people to actually do things outside the scope of big business. Do you agree with that? Because you mentioned that big business was, one of the whipping boys of the current culture.
I don't know if it's big business. I think entrepreneurship in business, in other words, people always, for space and sometimes for biology, people say, oh, that's something the government should be doing.
Yeah.
And maybe the government needs to start this thing, but the government no longer takes the big risks required for breakthroughs. I really think it's the entrepreneur who's driven by a passion, is willing to risk what they have because they believe in themselves. And so, anyway.
So for somebody who has access to the connectivity of the web, how easy is it to get to know what's happening in the sequencing and the development of the DNA software that we need? How accessible is that?
It's a great question, because it used to be you had to be in a major academic center that has existed for a century or more to have access to the latest information. Now all you need is exactly what you said. You need a mobile device, access to the internet anywhere in the world. And what developing countries don't like to hear is you have no excuses anymore. Right? You have access to all the same information that I have access to.
You don't need all the big infrastructure.
You don't need the big infrastructure. You do need an investment climate that if you have one of these ground-changing, earth-changing ideas, it has a chance to go somewhere. And that is one thing that's very different about the US right now than almost the entire rest of the world, is people are willing to use risk capital. Peter's right, our government won't do it. In fact, all the breakthroughs that my teams have had, we were denied government funding when we proposed them.
They were too risky.
They were too risky. Once we proved they worked, we were able to get lots of government funding. That's the opposite of the way it should be.
Absolutely.
The government should be paying for the risk, and when it works, industry should step in and fund it.
One of the beautiful things that exists today is that the world's biggest problems, water, food, energy, healthcare, education, are the world's biggest opportunities as well. Right? Invest and create a breakthrough, you can become a billionaire and have the thanks of the planet in that regard. And so it's a beautiful time to be alive. And so my question to everybody is, why not work on one of the grand challenges? Why not work on solving that? Big markets, big opportunities.
The best plant for production of oil right now on the planet is oil palm. Oil palm only produces about 800 gallons per acre per year. The most standard algae right now produces around 2,500 gallons per acre per year. The goal is to get it over 15,000 gallons. Wow. Corn produces 18 gallons per acre per year.
But you get a lot of votes in the Midwest.
Yes. But if you're going to try and replace just the transportation fuel in the US with corn, it would take a facility 3 times the size of the US. If you're going to do it with algae, if we can achieve these remarkable levels, it would be something the size of Rhode Island, a small state. That's still a big area, but when you look at the amount of surface of this country covered with agriculture, that could be shrunk by 90% and be more productive and create new industries at the same time.
Let's see if I got this right. Palm oil gets 800 gallons per
acre per year.
Acre. Como media hectárea, ¿no? Per year. And then algae gets 2,500.
Currently.
Which is much more.
Yes, but the goal is to get to 15,000.
But we haven't seen any big algae farms so far.
Well, so the difference between growing agriculture and trees like oil palm, you plant them and 5 years later they start to produce. Yeah. So the key things for the future of algae are going to be access to good sunlight. Well, you got a lot here. Salt water, you're not short of that. And just open land. The closer to the equator, the better in terms of constancy with it. And then just building up strains that do something different. And it's not just going to be those. There's a lot of plants that can be engineered. We're working on castor. Castor oil is one of the best oils ever produced. They stopped using the plant to produce it because it wasn't reliable enough. If we double or triple the amount of oil coming out of Castor, it starts to exceed oil palm, and it's the #1 producing plant. We're actually growing 100-hectare plots here in Mexico right now as tests. So it's using the new engineering, this fear that when you do biology based on knowledge is dangerous compared to random genetic mixing that's been done for centuries. We have to get over that foolish idea very quickly.
So there's no reason why Mexico could not be a net exporter of biologically produced fuels and foods.
It would be one of the best nations, the way it's configured, to be able to do that.
Well, that's a great ending for all of us. Thank you, Rayleigh. Muchísimas gracias. Qué oportunidad tener estas mentes juntas solo aquí con nosotros. Thank you very, very much. Great, gracias. Thank you.